How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Schaefer Stock Market Podcast. It's great to talk to everyone again. My name is Josh Soway. I'm an editor at Schaefer's Investment Research. We do these podcasts once a week. We try to get you in, out, and on your way in under 20 minutes or so, oftentimes quicker than that. What these are typically are just me finding the most interesting things I can talk about on the week, things that interest me that I think might help you as well. Stuff we're covering over at Schaefer's Investment Research at schaefersresearch.com, or things that I've been reading elsewhere as well. This week was particularly interesting as it was tough to narrow down the things I want to talk about. And as it's turned out, for the few thousands of you who have listened so far, first of all, thank you very much. But you've also noticed that I love talking about video games and the video game industry, and we're going to talk about it again today because that's what I like. So we have a lot to hit on there and a few other things, but this week was, as I said, it was tough narrowing it down for this week to get it under the 15 minutes or so. So we're going to get right into it and just a lot of interesting things to talk about. And we're going to start, though, first of all, not on the video game front, but we're going to start with a little quick discussion on the trade front. So to sum it all up quickly for you guys, of course, last week, President Donald Trump said that he could initiate new tariffs on imports from Mexico. Right now, you have the two countries trying to talk it out and come to some agreement. The U.S. and the Trump administration wants Mexico to decrease the number of immigrants coming into the U.S., and President Trump had this outline of tariffs that he's going to implement unless they stem the flow somehow. So the countries are meeting, trying to get something together. A few different people I've seen headlines are suggesting that they could come to some agreement quickly. I'm not sure. As I've said before, this is not something I want to speculate on. The markets lately have been trading around President Donald Trump's tweets and trade comments, and this Mexico thing came basically out of nowhere and surprised a lot of people. It's had an impact on a lot of stocks. I've touched on Chipotle a few times, and of course, avocados are a big part of their business, and they said that they may have to increase the price of their burritos. Another sector that has been impacted by these tariff talks is the solar sector. And two names that we were covering over at schaefersresearch.com, Enphase Energy, ticker ENPH, and SunPower Corporation, ticker SPWR. It was Credit Suisse who weighed in on these stocks, and what the analysts were looking at here was that SunPower's distributed generation module business has heavy Mexico exposure, and for Enphase Energy, it was looking at that company's microinverter shipments, which many come from Mexico apparently, and that's what Credit Suisse was looking at for these companies. And according to their estimates, every 5% increase in tariffs on imports from Mexico could cut into Enphase's earnings per share by up to 20%, and SunPower's adjusted EBITDA could be cut by 3.5%. And this was the most interesting part to me. The analyst note went on to suggest that these companies could move some of their businesses out of Mexico in the coming years. And that fascinated me because you read some of these stories that supposedly have sources inside the White House, close to President Trump, whatever, and they say that part of his idea here with the tariffs, and I think he's even mentioned it publicly before, I can't keep track of it all, but the idea could be that these tariffs will incentivize some companies get manufacturing out of China and Mexico, wherever we are applying these tariffs, and bring those products, the manufacturing of those products, back to the U.S. Now, many claim that that is unlikely to happen. It's not going to play out that way. Or if manufacturing is moved, it's just going to go to other countries, potentially like India or other countries in that area, and not back here in the U.S. Well, either way, it was interesting to see that those companies could move their businesses, according to Credit Suisse, out of Mexico. And again, the brokerage firm there predicting potential headwinds for both these companies. And I did mention China, and the latest on that front this week, we had President Trump come out and say that it's possible for him to raise tariffs on Chinese imports by another $300 billion. So that's the latest threat on that front. So that's a lot of different things to consider right now in the market. The Mexico angle and all the companies that it could affect, the China angle, which President Donald Trump again, suggesting more tariffs could be on the way, and we've seen more retailers come out and say that tariffs are affecting them negatively. And then, of course, you have the Fed lately. That's what's been driving the gains this week in the stock market. According to the headlines, the big thing traders are looking at is the potential for another rate cut from the Federal Reserve, since economic data lately has been somewhat subpar. We just this week had an ADP jobs report that came in way below expectations, so that could be suggesting that the economy is slowing down some. And you had Fed Chair Jerome Powell discuss how the Fed is monitoring these trade conversations and that they will act accordingly, which makes some people think that the Fed will come in and support the markets should things continue to go south as far as trade discussions. All right, let's get into the video game sector here. There's a lot I want to get through real quick. I want to start with this new ETF or exchange traded fund that is focused on esports. And esports has been discussed a lot in the financial media, this growing industry. And there was actually an interesting report that came out recently that was suggesting that a lot of numbers in the esports industry have been fabricated. This was in a big report from Kotaku.com. The article was titled Shady Numbers and Bad Business Inside the Esports Bubble. It was basically suggesting that people inside the industry were propping up these esports teams, even though they were losing a ton of money, and they were inflating the numbers to make things seem like they were going better than they are. So that was extremely interesting. But as for this new esports ETF, which is cleverly named NERD, ticker NERD, this ETF will become essentially the second esports ETF out there. There was already ESPO, but that ETF, its holdings were more on the developer and hardware front. Think like chip makers like NVIDIA and AMD, whereas this new ETF has more international exposure, and it's more about the consumer front and the companies at the front of e-streaming that the users, gamers, and the consumers are more familiar with. So looking at this fund's top holdings, the heaviest weighted holding in the fund is this company out of South Korea called Africa TV. That is AFREECA TV. It's weighted at 8.2% in the fund. Now, as I said, this is heavily weighted on international shares because the markets over there are bigger, especially in Asia. Esports is bigger than it is here in the Americas. So this fund is trying to pay attention to that and weigh that in appropriately. Looking at some more holdings here in the NERD ETF, you have Activision Blizzard, ticker ATVI, a name we've talked a lot about on here, that is weighted about 6% of the fund. And then on top of that, you had Take-Two Interactive, TTWO, that comes at about 4.7% weighted. Headset maker Turtle Beach is in there. That's ticker here. Logitech is in there. Tencent Holdings is in there with 3.4% weighted exposure. And then you do have NVIDIA down there. It's less. It's only 2.2% weighted. Bilibili, which I believe is a Chinese company, is in there as well. So a lot of different names. Interesting exposure there. And so if you're looking to get behind this growth in esports, this could be a great way to do it. So speaking of the growth in esports, when people hear esports, they may think about these big tournaments to get all the coverage and with huge sponsors, multi-million-dollar payouts. But then there's also this other side of it in video game streaming, which occurs on sites like Twitch, which is owned by Amazon, which Amazon bought a few years ago. But that's essentially people just going on these websites, following their favorite players and watching them play. And if you stream a video game, that means you set up a camera and people can watch you play, you commentate, maybe you sell some merchandise, you have giveaways, all kinds of stuff. Essentially, people just hang out there and watch others play a certain game that they like. There's a chat, a lot of interaction. So I went on Twitch earlier this week to check it out, see what it's like on there. I've had an account for a while, but I've never used it. And I went to watch a player play Call of Duty. His name is TP. He's one of the most popular players. That's TEEP. PEE. He has a bunch of views on YouTube as well, but I went on to his live stream. This was like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I think, and there were 3,000 people watching him play live, tons of people talking in his chat, and this is just one kid on there. There's tons of different streamers, so this is extremely popular, and I found it kind of interesting and funny. When I was on there, I saw people in the chat talking about how they're working while they're watching. So as more people work on computers, this could be something they do as they work, I guess, is watch other people play video games. And it also kind of made me think that this is something fairly easy to do, stream. You just need a few pieces of tech and you're set up to do this. So this could be another part-time opportunity like people use Uber and Lyft for. That is certainly something to watch out for as Twitch gains popularity. It seems more people are jumping on there to watch things. And just to give you an idea of how big this stuff really is, the two of the biggest names in streaming are PewDiePie and Ninja. They're two of the biggest names out there. And they have a ton of views on YouTube as well as Twitch. So they are teaming up this Friday to break the Twitch streaming record. Now, PewDiePie previously broke the record himself. He had over 300,000 viewers on his video as he played the popular free game Fortnite. So that'll be something to see how many people tune in to follow them or watch them play live and to see if they can get up into the hundreds of thousands, or I don't know how many people are expected to tune in, but this is certainly a huge part of the industry that is growing rapidly. And this is sort of aside, as I said, from the big tournaments that most people focus on the business side. Now, talking about video games, we have to talk about GameStop stock. We've talked about it before. It's been heavily shorted for a long time. A lot of people have seen the writing on the wall. The stock's been collapsing, and now it's trading at the lowest point since like 2003. The company just reported dismal earnings or sales. Once again, it actually beat on earnings expectation, but the sales were so bad, it suspended its quarterly dividend, and you don't know what's really going to come here next for GameStop. If someone's going to try to buy them out somehow, if they're going to file for bankruptcy, whatever's going to happen, but that stock just continues to get buried down it was below $5 a share. So that was another huge story from this week, seeing the decline in GameStop as more people go to digital games. And speaking of that, you had Google come out and announce pricing for its new Stadia cloud streaming service, and they're pricing that at $9.99 a month. It looks like more games are set to be announced for what could be featured on there. Of course, you have E3 coming up. That's the big video game expo out in LA. That'll be on June 11th through June 13th. A lot of big announcements expected to happen there, not just for video game developers, but you also have chip makers. An analyst expects AMD, the chip maker, to announce another big partnership during the event. So a lot of big news will be coming out at E3 next week as well. But again, Google Stadia, this really the first big foray into the cloud streaming video game space. That'll be priced at $9.99 a month to start out. That's going to be fascinating to see how they execute on that front and how many people try that out. Supposedly it's going to be tough at first with bandwidth and all types of things, internet speeds, to see if that goes as smoothly as they hope, but certainly a fascinating story to watch. Okay, let's hit on a couple other stories real quick that I was reading about this week that I found quite interesting. First off, a name that I've touched on a few times recently on the podcast, Beyond Meat, ticker BYND. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal that the company is struggling to stay up with all the demand from restaurants for its vegan burgers. So that stock popped again on that news. It's been outstanding since it went public. A lot of analysts are projecting huge sales growth from Beyond Meat. And of course, its biggest rival, Impossible Foods, is also reportedly preparing for an IPO as well. So that is an industry that is also booming. Another stock that made a big move this week is Rewalk Robotics. That is ticker RWLK. They make exosuits, and when I first saw that, I was like, whoa, it's like Iron Man. Like I thought it was, I was thinking something completely different, but luckily it's something much more important. They make products and technology that will help people with lower limb disabilities be able to walk and maneuver upstairs, all types of different things. There's a lot of videos on YouTube I saw to demonstrate what their products are capable of doing. So that was an interesting name to watch. That stock surged. It's given back some of those gains. It popped up to around $7, above the $7 mark on Wednesday. It was last seen trading around $5.60 per share. But definitely a company that has some life-changing products and an interesting name to watch. But I'm going to wrap it up for this week's Schaefer Stock Market Podcast. One last thing before I go, I want to call your attention to this week's Monday Morning Outlook. Our Senior VP of Research, Todd Salamone, laid out a number of different ways you guys can maneuver all the different things in the market that could lead to an extended pullback in stocks. He helps you with a few ways to dodge some of the headwinds in the market right now. I laid out some of them earlier, and he really breaks it down further in the Monday Morning Outlook. Always a great read, especially this week if you're worried about some of the risks in the market right now. Otherwise, make sure you check out Schaefer's on Twitter, on StockTwits, on Facebook, Instagram, all over the internet. But until next week, my name is Josh Selway. Thank you so much for listening. I will talk to you again soon.